I still remember the exact moment it happened, my front door slamming open as I stared at the cluster of police officers rushing toward my porch with their flashlights cutting through the morning haze, shouting my address like they were raiding a criminal hideout, and my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst, all because someone had switched my house numbers overnight. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you sounds unbelievable until you've lived through an HOA Karen who thinks laws bend for her. I had no idea that a simple metal number swapped on a wooden frame could turn into a full-blown felony investigation, sirens, neighbors standing around in robes, and me standing on my lawn trying to convince officers that I was me, and that my house was actually my house. And as confusing as it was, the worst part was knowing exactly who had done it before I even saw her face peeking from behind her blinds. The same woman who had been at war with me ever since I moved in. But that morning, watching cops aim flashlights at my windows, I realized this time she had gone too far, and the law was finally going to catch up with her. I just didn't expect how far it would go or how fast everything would unravel. It had started as a normal Wednesday, the kind where nothing is supposed to happen except maybe sipping coffee on the porch and checking emails before heading to work. And everything felt still, calm, almost boring in the best possible way. The neighborhood smelled like dew and damp earth. The birds were doing that early chirping that sounds like background noise to a perfect, peaceful morning, and I remember thinking I might actually get a quiet day for once. My lawn was trimmed, my driveway clear, and even the air felt cooler than usual, which was rare in our HOA-controlled suburban oven. I didn't feel anything off at first, not a hint that someone had crept onto my property in the middle of the night with a screwdriver and the arrogance of a movie villain. If anything, I was more focused on the mug in my hand and the steam fogging my glasses. And for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I might finally get a break from drama, that maybe the universe had decided to give me one morning where nothing went wrong. I should have known better. Peace in an HOA lasts about as long as an ice cube on asphalt. Around 7:13 a.m., I heard sirens, faint at first, like distant echoes bouncing off rooftops, and I didn't think they were for me, not even for a second, because why would they be? Sirens didn't belong on my street unless Karen was calling them about someone's trash, can being visible for longer than regulation standards. But then they got louder, sharper, like they were coming straight toward my driveway, and the sound rattled through my chest in a way that made my stomach drop. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to see two squad cars screech to a stop, gravel spitting out from under their tires, officers jumping out with that urgent stance that says they're responding to something bigger than a noise complaint. One of them pointed directly at my house, shouting my address, except it wasn't my address, not anymore, not after someone had switched the numbers with my neighbors in the dead of night. I froze. My brain stalled between confusion and fear, and all I could think was, that's not my number. That's not my number. But on my wall, screwed in neat little crooked rows, were digits I had never seen before. The officers began rushing toward me, flashlights raised even in daylight, hands near their belts, asking me who I was, why I was on this property, and demanding I verify my identity like I had wandered onto someone else's lawn. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out half their questions, and I kept trying to explain that my actual house number had been swapped, and that I lived here, that my ID matched the original number, that something had been tampered with. But they weren't buying it yet, not with the emergency call they had received claiming suspicious activity at an abandoned home, the home they believed I was standing in front of. And over the heads of the gathering neighbors, some concerned, others nosy, I caught a glimpse of her, Karen, in her floral robe, hair a frizzy nest, sipping tea at the window like she was watching a TV show she had personally directed. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I knew instantly, without proof, without evidence, that she had planned all of this, and I also knew she had no idea the consequences she had just invited. As the officers kept questioning me, their voices stern and clipped, I felt panic and anger wrestling in my chest, twisting together like wires sparking against each other. because every second that passed made me look more suspicious and made Karen's smug little performance behind her blinds even more infuriating. I tried to stay calm, answering everything they asked, handing over my ID, explaining the property records, and pointing out that my mailbox still had the correct number on it. But their eyes kept darting between me and the digits screwed onto my wall, and I could tell they were debating whether to detain me just to sort things out. A knot tightened in my stomach. The neighbors' whispers grew louder, a low wave of murmurs sliding across the street, and I could feel their eyes crawling over me like I was some criminal who'd been caught red-handed. I wanted to shout, to point at Karen's window and scream she did this, but I knew accusations without proof would only make me look unstable. So I breathed in slowly, tasting the metallic morning air, and tried to gather whatever composure I could. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. One officer stepped aside to radio dispatch, verifying my ID, confirming my real address, checking the lot number on county records, and I watched his face slowly shift from suspicion to confusion to something like irritation, though not at me. He walked back, nodding slightly, apologizing in that stiff, official way police do when they've realized the situation might be bigger than it looked. "Sir," he said, "it appears someone deliberately replaced your house numbers with your neighbors. That is considered tampering with official property identification." Hearing it out loud sent a cold shock through me. There it was, confirmation. Someone had intentionally staged this, and as the officer's voice carried down the street, the neighbors turned toward Karen's house almost in unison, their faces tightening, whispers turning sharper. Her blinds quivered. I caught her silhouette freeze for a split second before she retreated deeper inside, probably realizing the situation had taken a turn she never anticipated. And suddenly, the fear inside me began to shift, like a tide pulling away, and something stronger started taking its place. When the officers asked if I knew anyone who might want to mess with me or cause confusion regarding my property, I hesitated. I didn't want to exaggerate or sound paranoid, but there was no avoiding it now. So I told them about her, the complaints, the false reports, the petty violations she tried pinning on me, and how this neighborhood had become a battleground she believed she commanded. With every detail I shared, the officers' expressions grew tighter, more focused, and they began taking notes, stepping around my porch, snapping photos of the mismatched screws and the numbers themselves. One of them even tested how recently they'd been mounted. He twisted one lightly and the screw turned effortlessly. "Installed within the last few hours," he muttered. That line alone made a few neighbors gasp. My pulse throbbed in my neck as I watched everyone slowly piece together what had happened. And then, just as the officers began canvassing houses, a voice cut through the air, loud, shrill, and trembling with fake innocence. Karen burst out her front door with dramatic speed, clutching a mug, acting like she had just noticed the commotion, playing the role she always loved, the concerned, over-involved neighbor. "Officer, officer." She called out, waving her hand frantically as if she were the one who had summoned emergency services. I saw someone last night, someone suspicious near his house. I didn't want to assume anything, but I think whoever did this might have been trying to break in." Her voice pitched higher with every sentence, trying to craft a story on the spot, but she didn't realize that everyone was staring at her with expressions that looked dangerously close to disbelief. The officers turned toward her, their demeanor shifting subtly, and one of them asked, "Ma'am, can you describe this person?" She froze, just for half a second, but in that silence the entire street seemed to inhale together. Her story started unraveling the moment she opened her mouth again, details contradicting each other, descriptions that made no sense, time frames that overlapped impossibly, and her eyes kept darting back to me like she expected me to play along or cower under the weight of her accusations. And then, in a moment so perfect it almost felt scripted, the officer who had been inspecting the screws approached her holding a pair of gloves, thin, floral, patterned gardening gloves he had found discarded in the mulch near my porch. "Ma'am," he asked, "are these yours?" Her face drained, her mouth opened, and all she managed was a tiny, choking sound. The moment those gloves came out, the entire neighborhood seemed to shift, like gravity tilted toward Karen, and everyone was quietly waiting for her to implode under the pressure she had built for months. I watched her eyes flicker between the gloves, the officers, and the crowd gathering near the sidewalk, trying desperately to compose herself, but every second that passed made her more frantic. "Those aren't mine," she blurted out too quickly, her voice cracking on the last word, and the officer simply raised a brow as he turned the gloves over, revealing the initials stitched into the wrist lining, K.M., her initials. The air went still. Even the birds seemed to stop. My heartbeat slowed in a surreal wave of disbelief and vindication as I stared at the letters, knowing there was no way she could talk her way out of this one. She stumbled back a step, clutching her robe tighter around herself, her breathing turning sharp and ragged like she had been caught in the middle of some heist gone wrong. And for the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I watched genuine fear ripple across her face. The officers approached her with calm, practiced steps, asking if she'd be willing to answer some questions about her whereabouts the previous night, and she immediately launched into a rambling, chaotic explanation about midnight gardening, insomnia, stray cats, and a supposed shadowy figure she kept referencing but couldn't describe. The neighbors exchanged glances, some amused, some irritated, most fed up. One of them, Mr. Donnelly from 2 houses down, finally muttered loud enough for the officers to hear, "She's been harassing him since the day he moved in." That comment triggered a cascade of confirmations from others, each telling their own small story: noise complaints, lawn accusations, parking disputes, all of which built a mountain of behavioral patterns the officers could no longer ignore. I stood silently, listening to the voices I didn't expect to speak up for me, each one adding another layer of truth that pressed down on Karen's collapsing defense. Her eyes dotted around, growing wilder with every accusation she heard, and she kept shaking her head like she could erase reality through sheer denial. When the officers asked her directly whether she had tampered with my property, something in her finally snapped. Her face twisted, her lips trembling, and she let out a frustrated, high-pitched yell. "He doesn't belong here. He doesn't follow the rules. Someone had to do something." The silence that followed her outburst felt like a physical blow, heavy, suffocating, undeniable. Every neighbor stared, the officers stiffened, and my entire body felt both numb and electric as the truth settled over the street like dust after an explosion. She had said it, out loud, with every ounce of entitlement she possessed. One of the officers stepped forward, voice firm and steady, informing her that tampering with official property identification wasn't just an HOA issue, it was a state-level offense that could be classified as a felony, especially since it had resulted in emergency services being deployed under false pretenses. Her face crumpled, the mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the driveway, coffee splattering across the concrete like a spilled confession. They asked her to turn around. She resisted at first, arms flailing, voice cracking, insisting she was the victim, but the officers moved efficiently, guiding her hands behind her back as the cuffs clicked shut with a finality that sent a ripple through every witness. The crowd watched as she was escorted down the sidewalk toward the patrol car, her robe fluttering in the breeze like a defeated flag, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and humiliation. And though I didn't take pleasure in seeing anyone arrested, I couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of justice that washed over me, justice not just for the morning chaos, but for the months of manipulation and harassment she had inflicted on the neighborhood. The officers assured me the charges would be processed, including property tampering, filing a false emergency report, and misuse of identifying numbers. As they spoke, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long finally eased, replaced with a cool, steady calm. In the days that followed, the neighborhood seemed lighter, quieter, almost peaceful in a way I hadn't realized we'd been missing. People I barely knew stopped by to apologize for not stepping in sooner, for letting her reign over the block unchecked, and some even helped me reinstall the correct house numbers, this time with reinforced brackets and security screws. And as I stood on my porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, I felt something settle inside me, a reminder that authority isn't defined by noise or ego, but by truth, consistency, and integrity. And sometimes justice arrives when entitlement goes too far. If you believe that accountability should always win, make sure to like, share, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation.